Hi everyone, my name is Sabrina Harms and I am a volunteer for BronxWorks. Today I will be presenting the Stellar Farmers Market curriculum for the Nutrition Education Capacity Program. And today's star ingredient is one of my favorites and is a staple at our farm stands, the potato. And we will be making smashed potato with kale. Let's check out that recipe.
For this recipe, you will need 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil, 6 cups of diced potatoes, 6 cups of diced kale, 1 cup of water, 3 tablespoons of chopped scallions, 1/4 teaspoon of red pepper flakes, and salt and pepper to taste. This recipe will make 8 servings. So here are all of the ingredients that you need to make smashed potato with kale. I picked up my fresh produce from the BronxWorks farm stand this week and made a couple of substitutions that you can make too, depending on what you have available or your taste. For example, I substituted an onion for the scallion that the recipe calls for, and I used spinach instead of kale. Another leafy green like cabbage would work as well. You can also use sweet potatoes or parsnips in place of regular potatoes for a different flavor. I washed both my hands and my produce thoroughly before I started cooking, which is important for food safety. So let's start by cutting our onion. To begin, we want to have a flat surface on each side, so we're just going to cut off those rounded edges really fast. When you're cutting, you're going to want to move your knife in a wave-like motion rather than simply slicing across for a more precise and safe cut. Now that your onion is flat on either side, you can cut it in half. It's good to make your fingers claw-like instead of laying them flat against the onion to keep them safe while you're cutting. Again, move the knife in a wave-like motion for a more precise cut. Now that we have 2 halves, we'll move on to dicing our onion. Before continuing to cut any more, you're going to want to take off that papery layer on the top of your onion. This layer doesn't really have any taste, so it's good to just remove it as it can be a little bit difficult to cut with it on. Now that your onion is nice and smooth, we can start dicing. So first we'll start by putting the onion down and making cuts the long way. As you can see, I'm moving my knife in that wave-like motion, which is giving me a nice cut and making sure that the pieces are fairly even though the onion is different sizes all around. Be careful with your fingers when you're cutting these smaller pieces. Make sure that you're keeping your hands cupped so that you don't have your fingers in the way of the knife. Now that our onions are cut lengthwise, we're going to cut them the other way in order to get those nice little dices. Again, we're going to move our knife in that wave-like motion and keep our fingers cupped to practice good knife safety. Now that our onions are completely diced, we're going to also chop up our potato. So as you can see, I've taken off the bottom of the potato as it's a rounded edge in order to make it a little bit easier to cut. Again, we're practicing good knife safety here. Since the potatoes are going to be mashed, they don't have to be in precise pieces, but we're still going to chop them up to make it a little bit easier once they've cooked. So first I'm going to start by cutting this potato lengthwise and making these small strips. After that, I'm going to flip the potato and then cut the opposite direction to make little squares. It's easier if the potato can just stay in line, all of the little pieces, so if any pieces move out of the way, just line them back up with your knife like that. Here's some key points about potatoes. For the best buy, choose potatoes that are firm and without green spots. The skins are nutritious and delicious, just scrub them before preparing to get off any dirt. And to keep fresh, you can store potatoes away from onions in a cool, dry place for up to 2 weeks. Potatoes are good for you as they contain potassium, which is good for a healthy heart. Now I'm going to cut my leafy green, which could be kale or spinach like I'm using, or another green such as cabbage if you choose. It's a little bit harder to get those diced pieces when you're using something thinner like these leaves, so what I'm doing is making a little pile of them to make it easier to cut. Now I'm lining up my pile and cutting lengthwise again, and once this is done, I'll flip over the pile and cut the other direction to get those small pieces. Spinach and other leafy greens are great additions to a recipe as they contain a lot of vitamin C, which is good for boosting our immune system during these cold months. While you're preparing your produce, you can begin to heat oil in a large frying pan over medium heat. The first ingredient you're going to add is potatoes. Add the potatoes to your pan and then cook for 5 minutes. Here are some quick tips when using potatoes. You can add potatoes to soups and stews, and you should also choose potatoes that are smooth, with few flaws on the skins. Be sure to eat the skin of potatoes instead of peeling to get more fiber and potassium out of your meal. My potatoes have now been cooking for about 5 minutes. I'm just going to stir them to make sure that they're cooking evenly, and then I'm going to add my spinach. This is the time where you would add kale if that's what you're using. Together, the potatoes and kale are going to cook for 5 more minutes. Remember that cooking time is family time. Kids can help out by scrubbing potato skins and adding raw cut potatoes to a bowl and covering completely with cold water to keep them from turning brown. These potatoes can then be stored in the refrigerator and used within 24 hours. After you put in the spinach, you might want to stir around the spinach and potato mixture a little bit just to make sure that everything is mixed well together. My potatoes and greens have now been cooking for 5 minutes together, and you'll notice that my spinach has wilted. If you end up using spinach too, just know that that's completely normal. That's what happens to spinach when it's put over heat. We're now going to add water to our pan and then cover and cook for 5 minutes. All right, 5 minutes have passed, so let's check back in on our potatoes and greens. As you can see, the water's starting to bubble a little bit, and the air smells really good at this point. You can really smell the potatoes and spinach coming together. Now let's mash the potatoes and kale until smooth. I'm using a spoon to do this, the back of a spoon, just to mash everything up, as it was a little bit easier for me. But you can also use a fork or a potato masher if you have one. Just make sure that you're mashing all around the edges and not leaving any of the potatoes out. Once your potatoes and kale are pretty well mashed, you can start adding your scallions, red pepper flakes, and salt and pepper to taste. I'm making sure to put a little bit of my onions, which I'm using as a substitution for scallions, all around the pan to make sure that they mix evenly. Here I go, putting my salt over. Again, this is to taste, so if you don't like putting a lot of salt in your cooking, you don't have to add it. Alternatively, you could also add another type of spice if you're interested. Once you've added in all of your spices and extras, feel free to mash your potatoes a little bit more if they weren't completely mashed beforehand, and mix everything around to make sure that it's well blended. And now you're done, so you can serve hot and enjoy. Refrigerate any leftovers. I sampled a bit of this recipe when I was done cooking and thought it was absolutely delicious. If you liked how this recipe looked, remember to stop by every Thursday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. to our local farm stand to shop locally and get fresh fruits and vegetables so you can make these healthy recipes at home. When you stop by, make sure you go to the outreach table so you can watch these virtual videos and receive health bucks to use at the farm stand. We accept cash, FMNP coupons, health bucks, EBT, and SNAP. If you haven't already seen the cooking recipe videos, make sure to check them out and like and comment below if you enjoyed this video. Hope you join us next time. Thank you for listening. Bye.